Sister Maria Therese vanished without a trace from St. Catherine's Church in 1979. For 40 years, her disappearance haunted the small town of Millfield, becoming the stuff of local legend and whispered speculation. Then, a plumber investigating a persistent leak uncovered something hidden beneath the sanctuary floor, a discovery that would finally reveal the truth behind one of the county's most baffling cold cases. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And please consider to subscribe. The water-damaged floor tiles yielded easily beneath Marco Vasquez's pry bar, revealing decades of accumulated grime and the rotted subfloor beneath. 23 years as a plumber had taught him to expect the unexpected beneath church buildings, ancient pipes, forgotten relics, even the occasional time capsule. But nothing had prepared him for what lay beneath St. Catherine's sanctuary floor. "How's it going down there, Mr. Vasquez?" Father Riley called from above. The young priest's voice echoed through the cavernous space of the empty church. "Just getting started, Father," Marco replied, wiping sweat from his brow, despite the coolness beneath the floor. "Looks like you've got more than just a leaky pipe. The whole substructure's water-damaged." St. Catherine's had stood in Millfield since 1908, a testament to the faith of the Polish and Irish immigrants who had built it with their calloused hands. The stone exterior remained solid as ever, but the interior systems had been deteriorating for years. The persistent puddle that appeared near the altar after every heavy rain had finally prompted Father Riley to call for professional help. Marco shifted his flashlight, illuminating the cramped crawlspace. Decades of plumbing band-aids had created a labyrinth of pipes, copper meeting galvanized meeting PVC in an unholy communion that violated every code in the book. As he traced the most recent leak to its source, his beam caught something odd about the brick foundation wall to his right. "What the hell?" he muttered, inching closer. Where the rest of the foundation was rough-hewn stone, this section was brick, newer than the surrounding material and subtly different in pattern. But what caught his attention was the faint outline of what appeared to be a door. No, that couldn't be right. Churches didn't have secret doors under their floors. Yet, as he brushed away years of cobwebs and dirt, the outline became unmistakable. A bricked-over doorway, approximately 3 feet high and 2 feet wide, sealed but distinct from the surrounding foundation. Curiosity overcame professional focus. Marco tapped the bricked section with his hammer. Instead of the solid thud he expected, the sound was hollow, resonant. Several of the bricks shifted slightly under the impact. "Everything okay down there?" Father Riley called again, a note of concern in his voice. "Fine, Father," Marco answered automatically, his attention fixed on the anomaly before him. "Just checking something out." Telling himself he was simply being thorough in his inspection, Marco positioned his pry bar against the loose bricks. With minimal effort, one came away in his hand, then another. Whoever had sealed this doorway had done so hastily, using mortar that had deteriorated over time. After removing several bricks, he directed his flashlight through the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness, illuminating what appeared to be a narrow passageway extending beyond the foundation walls. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he whispered. Marco was a practical man with little patience for ghost stories, but something about that yawning darkness sent a chill through him. Still, 40 years of Midwestern practicality trumped momentary superstition. He removed a few more bricks, creating an opening large enough to peer through properly. The passage beyond was no natural formation. Hand-laid brick walls extended roughly 10 feet before the tunnel curved out of sight. The floor was packed earth, the ceiling supported by wooden beams that had somehow resisted rot over what must have been decades. Marco hesitated, then called up to the priest. "Father, you might want to come see this." 5 minutes later, Father Riley knelt beside the opening, his expression transitioning from curiosity to concern as he surveyed the hidden passage. "I've only been at St. Catherine's for 3 years, he said, almost apologetically. "I had no idea anything like this existed." He glanced at Marco. "Prohibition tunnel, maybe? I know many churches had them." Marco shook his head. Prohibition ended in 33. This work looks newer than that. He gestured to the crude brickwork. And why seal it off from inside the church? Doesn't make sense. Against his better judgment, Marco widened the opening and squeezed through, ignoring Father Riley's protests. His curiosity had fully overcome his professional detachment. The passage was cramped but navigable, forcing him to hunch as he followed its course by flashlight. The air grew staler as he progressed, carrying an unpleasant mustiness that spoke of decades without circulation. The tunnel curved, then opened into a small chamber approximately 8 feet square. Unlike the rough passageway, this room showed signs of habitation. Marco's flashlight revealed a rusted metal cot against one wall, its thin mattress long since rotted to tatters. A crude wooden shelf held several objects, a tarnished metal cup, what appeared to be a leather-bound book, and, most distinctive of all, a rosary with wooden beads that had somehow survived the passage of time. "What in God's name?" Marco whispered. His beam caught something else, a faded photograph pinned to the wall. He stepped closer, heart pounding. The image showed a young woman in a nun's habit, her face serious, but with eyes that suggested a suppressed smile. Below the photograph, someone had written in now faded ink, "Sister Maria Therese, 1979. The date struck Marco with particular force. He wasn't a particularly devout Catholic anymore, but he'd grown up in Millfield. He vaguely remembered the story, a young nun who had vanished from St. Catherine's without a trace, sometime in the late 70s. The disappearance had briefly been national news, with speculation ranging from a crisis of faith to foul play, before fading into local legend. "Mr. Vasquez?" Father Riley's voice echoed from the passage. "I really must insist you come back. This could be dangerous." Marco picked up the leather-bound book, which he now recognized as a journal, and the rosary. "You need to call the police, Father," he called back, his voice unsteady. "I think I've found something about Sister Maria." Hours later, Marco sat in the rectory, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Police officers moved through the church, their radios crackling with staticky communications. The hidden chamber had become a potential crime scene, the area around the altar now marked off with yellow tape that seemed sacrilegious against the backdrop of sacred space. Detective Laura Steinman sat across from him, her lined face suggesting decades of experience with human darkness. "You did the right thing calling us, Mr. Vasquez," she said, placing Sister Maria's journal in an evidence bag. "This is potentially significant evidence in a very cold case." "I remember when she disappeared," Marco said. "I was just a kid, but it was all anyone talked about for months." Father Riley, looking pale, nodded. "The diocese still has files on the case. Sister Maria Therese was only 23 when she vanished. There was an extensive investigation, but nothing was ever found." He hesitated. "Until today?" "What happens now?" Marco asked. Detective Steinman's expression remained professionally neutral. "We investigate. This journal may tell us something about what happened in 1979. She stood, gathering her notes. "Mr. Vasquez, we'll need you to give a formal statement. Father Riley will need access to any church records from that period." As they spoke, a uniformed officer entered the rectory. "Detective, there's someone here claiming to be related to the missing nun. Says his name is Thomas Keller." Marco watched as an elderly man entered, his back straight despite his years, his eyes sharp with an emotion Marco couldn't quite name, something between hope and dread. "I'm Sister Maria's brother," the man said without preamble. "I heard on the police scanner about a discovery at St. Catherine's." His voice faltered. "Is it true? Have you found something about my sister?" Thomas Keller's weathered hands trembled slightly as Detective Steinman placed the evidence bag containing the rosary on the rectory table. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The detective nodded and Thomas carefully opened the bag, extracting the wooden rosary with reverence. He turned it over, examining the hand-carved crucifix at its end, then closed his eyes briefly. "It's hers," he confirmed. "I gave this to her when she took her final vows." Each bead was carved from the oak tree in our parents' yard. His finger traced a small notch in one of the beads. This mark, I accidentally nicked it while carving. Maria said it made it perfect because it showed it was made by human hands. Detective Steinman made a note. Mr. Keller, your sister disappeared in February 1979. According to the original police reports, there was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. She simply vanished. Thomas's expression hardened. That's what they concluded, yes. The official theory was that she left voluntarily, abandoned her vocation. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. I never believed it. Maria was devoted to her calling. Something happened to her. Father Riley, who had been listening silently, interjected. The journal might tell us more. Have you had a chance to examine it, Detective? Only preliminarily, Steinman replied. The handwriting matches samples of Sister Maria's from church records. The last entry is dated February 12th, 1979, 3 days before she was reported missing. What did it say? Thomas asked eagerly. The detective consulted her notes. It's somewhat cryptic. She wrote, "The figures don't lie. I've checked them 3 times. What the bishop is doing isn't just unethical, it's criminal. Father G agrees we must confront him, but I fear the consequences. The truth must come to light, even at great cost." A heavy silence fell over the room. Bishop Harmon, Thomas said finally. Robert Harmon was the bishop then. A powerful man with friends in high places. He died in 1995. And Father G? Steinman asked. Father Gregory Wojcik, Father Riley supplied, having pulled out an old parish directory. He was the pastor at St. Catherine's from 1971 to 1986. Died in 2001. Marco, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke up. So Sister Maria discovered something incriminating about the bishop, and then she disappeared? That's not a coincidence. We don't jump to conclusions, Mr. Vasquez, Detective Steinman cautioned, though her expression suggested she was thinking along similar lines. But we do follow evidence. Mr. Keller will need to conduct a more thorough examination of that underground chamber and the tunnels. Do you know if your sister mentioned anything about financial improprieties within the church before she disappeared? Thomas frowned, thinking back over 4 decades. She was troubled in the weeks before she vanished. Said something about the church books not adding up. I didn't press her. Maria took her vows seriously, including confidentiality. His voice cracked slightly. I've replayed our last conversation 1,000 times, wishing I'd asked more questions. Father Riley stood abruptly. I should check the archives. If Sister Maria was investigating financial irregularities, there might be records. I'll come with you, Detective Steinman said. Mr. Keller, would you be willing to give a formal statement? And Mr. Vasquez will need you to show our forensic team exactly how you found the entrance to the passage. As they dispersed to their tasks, Marco found himself standing alone with Thomas in the rectory. The older man stared at the rosary in his hands, lost in memories. You know, Thomas said suddenly, everyone gave up looking for her after a while. The police, the church, even our other siblings eventually accepted she was gone. But I never did. He looked up at Marco, eyes bright with unshed tears. 40 years I've kept her memory alive, kept looking. And now, because of a leaky pipe and your curiosity, we might finally learn the truth. Marco shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the man's gratitude. I just did what anyone would do. Thomas shook his head. Most people would have patched the pipe and collected their check. You followed your instincts? He carefully placed the rosary back in the evidence bag. Thank you for not looking the other way. By evening, St. Catherine's Church had been transformed into a hive of investigative activity. The forensic team had expanded the opening in the foundation wall, allowing easier access to the underground chamber. Powerful lights illuminated what had lain in darkness for decades. Detective Steinman, now dressed in coveralls, emerged from the passage, her expression troubled as she approached Father Riley and Thomas Keller, who waited anxiously in the sanctuary. The tunnel network is extensive, she reported. It appears to connect to the old convent building, the rectory, and extends beyond church property. Some sections have collapsed, but we've found something significant." She paused. "There's another room, larger than the first, that appears to have been some kind of office. We found financial ledgers dating from 1975 to 1979, hidden behind a loose stone." "Maria's evidence?" Thomas breathed. "Potentially," the detective agreed. "Our forensic accountant will need to examine them, but preliminary inspection suggests they document financial transactions. Large sums being diverted from church accounts to various offshore holdings. If these records are accurate, someone was embezzling significant amounts from the diocese." Father Riley paled. "Bishop Harmon?" "The ledgers don't specify individuals, just account numbers. But given your sister's journal entry..." She left the implication hanging. "But this doesn't explain what happened to Maria," Thomas insisted. "If she discovered embezzlement, why disappear? Why not report it?" "That's what we need to determine," Steinman said. "We're continuing to search the tunnels that remain accessible. One appears to lead away from church property toward what used to be diocesan land." "The old retreat house," Father Riley supplied. "It was sold off in the early 1980s. It's private property now, has been for decades." Detective Steinman's expression sharpened. "Do you know who owns it?" Father Riley shook his head. "The records would be with the county assessor. It changed hands several times after the diocese sold it." "I'll have someone check property records first thing tomorrow," Steinman decided. "In the meantime, we'll continue documenting everything in the tunnels." As they spoke, a young officer approached, holding an evidence bag. "Detective, we found this wedged behind the shelf in the first chamber. Looks like it was deliberately hidden." Inside the bag was a small, leather-bound address book, its pages yellowed with age. Steinman carefully opened it, flipping through the entries. "Most of these are church contacts," she observed. "Clergy names, diocesan offices. Wait." She stopped at a page near the back. "This is interesting. An entry for safe haven with what appears to be directions, not an address." Thomas leaned forward. "Maria's handwriting?" "Yes," Steinman confirmed. "And it's written in a different ink than the other entries, possibly added later." She studied the notations. 3 miles past the old mill, right at the lightning-struck oak, follow the creek bed to the clearing. These are landmarks, not street directions." "The old Mackenzie property," Thomas said suddenly. "It borders what used to be the retreat house. There was a clearing there where we'd picnic as children. Our family knew the Mackenzies." His eyes widened with a sudden realization. The retreat house. It's not far from where these tunnels seem to be heading. The detective's expression turned grim. "Mr. Keller, I think it's time we find out who owns that property now." Dawn was breaking over Millfield when Detective Steinman pulled up to the station, finding Thomas Keller already waiting outside despite the early hour. The man's determination was admirable, if potentially complicating for her investigation. "You should be resting, Mr. Keller," she said as he climbed into her unmarked car. "I've rested enough for 40 years, he replied simply. "Any news on the property owner?" Steinman nodded as she pulled away from the curb. County records show it was purchased from the diocese in 1980 by a church-affiliated trust. In 1982, ownership transferred to a Margaret Winters, who has held the title ever since. No mortgages, no liens, property taxes paid promptly every year. "Margaret Winters," Thomas repeated. "The name means nothing to me." "She's something of a mystery," Steinman admitted. "No criminal record, no driver's license renewals for decades, minimal paper trail altogether. Property tax payments come through an attorney's office. By all accounts, she's a recluse." "You think this Margaret Winters is connected to Maria's disappearance?" "It's a lead worth pursuing," the detective replied carefully. "The timing of the property transfer is certainly interesting. Less than a year after your sister vanished." They drove in silence through the awakening town, passing the renovated downtown with its artisanal coffee shops and boutiques that had gradually replaced the five and dimes and hardware stores of previous decades. Millfield had changed substantially since 1979, transforming from a struggling factory town to a modestly prosperous bedroom community for the nearby city. As they left the town limits, the landscape opened into rolling farmland interspersed with patches of woodland. After several miles, Steinman turned onto a narrow country road, the pavement giving way to gravel. "The retreat house property is just ahead," she said. "Now owned by Margaret Winters. We don't have grounds for a search warrant yet, but we can certainly knock on the door." The gravel drive curved through dense trees before opening onto a clearing where a large Victorian farmhouse stood, its white paint immaculate, gardens meticulously maintained. Nothing about the property suggested 40 years of secrets. "Recluse or not, someone's keeping this place in good condition," Thomas observed. They parked beside a modest sedan, a recent model, well-maintained but not flashy. As they approached the house, Thomas suddenly stopped, his attention caught by something in one of the flower beds bordering the porch. "Those are St. Mary's roses," he said, his voice strained. "An heirloom variety. Our mother grew them. Maria took cuttings to every place she lived." Steinman made a mental note of this detail as they climbed the porch steps. Before she could knock, the door opened, revealing an elderly woman with silver hair, pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a cardigan over a plain blouse and skirt, her posture straight despite her evident age. Her expression was wary but composed. "Margaret Winters?" Detective Steinman asked, showing her badge. "I'm Detective Laura Steinman with the Millfield Police. This is Thomas Keller. We'd like to ask you a few questions." The woman's gaze had fixed on Thomas, her composed expression faltering for just an instant, so briefly that Steinman might have missed it had she not been watching carefully. "I don't get many visitors," Margaret Winters said, her voice soft but clear. "What is this regarding?" "We're investigating a cold case that may connect to this property," Steinman explained. "May we come in?" The woman hesitated, then stepped back, opening the door wider. "Of course." As they entered, Thomas Keller stumbled slightly, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the wall. Steinman glanced at him with concern, but his attention was fixed on a small table in the entryway, specifically on the hand-carved wooden frames that held several landscape photographs. "Are you all right, Mr. Keller?" she asked quietly. "Fine," he whispered back, though his face had paled considerably. "But those frames, they're my father's work. His wood carving was distinctive. The corner pattern is unique to him." Margaret Winters led them into a comfortable sitting room, sunlight streaming through lace curtains onto well-worn but quality furniture. Everything about the space suggested simple, modest taste, almost austere, but with touches of warmth in carefully chosen details. "Now," she said, settling into an armchair, hands folded in her lap, "how can I help with your investigation?" Detective Steinman maintained her professional demeanor as she explained the discovery beneath St. Catherine's Church, the hidden chamber, the journal entries, the financial records. Throughout her account, Margaret Winters remained perfectly still, her expression revealing nothing, though her hands clasped and unclasped in her lap. "We have reason to believe," Steinman concluded, "that these tunnels may extend in the direction of this property, which was once church-owned. Would you know anything about that, Ms. Winters?" "This house has its secrets, like many old places," Margaret replied carefully. "There are sealed doorways in the basement that I've never opened. When I purchased the property, I was told they led to old root cellars." Thomas, who had been silent during the detective's explanation, suddenly leaned forward. "Miss Winters, does the name Maria Therese Keller mean anything to you?" A flicker crossed the woman's face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition, quickly suppressed. "The missing nun," she said after a pause. "I've lived in this area long enough to have heard the story." "May I show you something?" Thomas asked, removing a folded photograph from his wallet. He held it out to Margaret, who hesitated before taking it. The photograph showed a family gathered on the steps of a church, parents, several children ranging from teenagers to young adults, all dressed in their Sunday best. Thomas pointed to a young woman with a bright smile and intelligent eyes. "That's Maria, at my wedding, in 1974, 5 years before she disappeared. She was the one who kept our family together after our parents passed. The steady one, the faithful one." His voice broke slightly. "The one who taught me what integrity meant." Margaret Winters stared at the photograph, her composed facade cracking just enough for Steinman to notice the tremor in her hands. "Mr. Keller," the elderly woman said, her voice suddenly hoarse, "why have you carried this particular photograph for 40 years? It was an odd question, specific in a way that caught Steinman's attention. Thomas seemed equally struck by it. "Because it's the only one where you can see the small scar above her eyebrow," he answered slowly. "From when she fell from the apple tree at our grandparents' farm. She was trying to rescue me after I climbed too high and got scared." Margaret Winters's hand moved unconsciously to her own eyebrow, where, Steinman now noticed, a faint scar was just visible beneath carefully applied makeup. The room fell silent, the only sound the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece and the distant call of birds from the garden. Thomas stared at Margaret, his expression transforming from confusion to dawning recognition. "Maria?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The elderly woman closed her eyes briefly, as if in prayer or resignation. When she opened them again, tears glistened but did not fall. "I wondered if you'd recognize me, Tommy," she said softly, using a diminutive no one had called Thomas Keller in decades. "I thought I'd changed too much." Detective Steinman found herself in the uncommon position of being genuinely surprised, a rarity in her 27 years of police work. "Sister Maria?" she asked, instinctively reaching for her notepad before catching herself. The woman who had been living as Margaret Winters nodded once, her posture shifting subtly, shoulders straightening, chin lifting in a gesture of dignity that seemed to transform her despite no physical change. "I haven't been called Sister Maria in 40 years, she said. "But yes, was Maria Therese Keller." Thomas made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh, starting to rise from his seat. "Please," Maria said, raising a hand to halt him. "Before there are embraces or celebrations, you need to hear the whole story, both of you." She looked directly at Steinman. "Detective, I imagine you have questions about the legality of assuming a new identity, among other things. Right now, I'm more concerned with understanding what happened in 1979, Steinman replied evenly. "You were believed dead or missing for 40 years, Ms. Keller. That's a long time to let your family suffer." A flash of pain crossed Maria's face. "Yes," she acknowledged. "An unforgivable cruelty in many ways. But at the time, I believed I had no choice." She turned to her brother. "Tommy, I never wanted to hurt you or the others, but what I discovered put everyone connected to me at risk." "The financial records," Thomas said. "The embezzlement." Maria nodded. "It started with discrepancies in the charitable donation accounts, funds designated for the mission hospital in Guatemala, the local soup kitchen, the children's home, all showing expenditures that didn't match the actual disbursements." Her voice took on a clipped, precise quality, as if she were testifying. "I was good with numbers. That's why Father Gregory asked me to help with the bookkeeping. At first I thought they were simple accounting errors." "But they weren't," Steinman prompted when Maria paused. "Number." "They were systematic. Nearly 30% of all charitable donations were being diverted to private accounts. When I dug deeper, I found similar patterns in construction funds, maintenance budgets, even seminary scholarships." Maria's hands twisted in her lap. "Over 5 years, the amounts totaled over $2 million. Thomas whistled softly. "A fortune in 1970s money." "And it led back to Bishop Harmon?" Steinman asked. "Not just the bishop," Maria replied, her expression darkening. 3 monsignors, a chancery official, and 2 prominent laymen who sat on the diocesan finance council. A network of corruption protected by the authority of the church itself. "You confronted them?" Thomas guessed. Maria's laugh was brittle. "I was young and naive. I believed that exposing the truth would be enough, that right would prevail. Father Gregory warned me to be careful, to gather more evidence before coming forward, but I was—" she smiled faintly— "righteous. I went directly to Bishop Harmon with my findings. What happened? Steinman asked, though she suspected she knew. He listened calmly, asked thoughtful questions, expressed appropriate concern. Maria's voice turned bitter. Then he explained very reasonably what would happen if I pursued the matter. The scandal would damage the church irreparably. Charitable giving would dry up, hurting the very people I wanted to protect. My family, you, Tommy, and the others would face scrutiny, harassment, possibly worse. He threatened us? Thomas asked, aghast. Not explicitly. He was too clever for that, but the message was clear. Maria stood, moving to the window where she gazed out at her garden. That night, there was a break-in at the convent. My room was ransacked. The copies of financial records I'd made were taken. The Mother Superior called it vandalism, but I knew better. The police weren't notified, Steinman noted, recalling the case file. The Mother Superior deferred to the bishop, Maria confirmed. Church matters were to be handled internally. The next day I received a letter reassigning me to a mission in Bolivia, effective immediately. I knew what it meant. I'd be isolated, discredited, possibly worse. So you ran? Thomas said, not accusingly. Maria turned back to face them, her expression resolute. Not immediately. First, I hid the original ledgers and evidence in the tunnels beneath St. Catherine's. Most people had forgotten they existed. Old prohibition passages that connected the church buildings. Father Gregory knew about them from restoration work in the 60s. Steinman's investigative instincts were fully engaged now. Father Gregory helped you disappear. Maria nodded. He believed me, and he feared for my safety. He created a new identity for me, Margaret Winters, a widow from Chicago. Used church funds, ironically, stolen ones he'd managed to reclaim, to purchase this property through a trust when it went up for sale. He helped me escape through the tunnels the night before I was to leave for Bolivia. And the underground chamber, where we found your belongings? Steinman asked. A temporary hiding place while arrangements were finalized. I lived there for nearly 3 months, venturing out only at night. Father Gregory brought food, news, supplies. Maria's voice softened with memory. He risked everything to help me. Thomas stood slowly, crossing to where his sister stood. You could have come to me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I would have helped, protected you. Maria shook her head. They were watching you, Tommy. All of you. For months after I disappeared, your phone was tapped, your mail opened. Father Gregory confirmed it. If you'd known I was alive, they would have seen it in your face, your actions. Your ignorance was your protection, and mine. But 40 years, Maria, Thomas persisted. Bishop Harmon died in 95. The others must be gone too. Some died, some retired to comfortable lives built on stolen charity, Maria acknowledged. But the system that protected them remained. The diocesan attorney, who helped cover up the embezzlement, became a federal judge. The Monsignor who organized the offshore accounts became an archbishop. Her expression hardened. And I'd committed crimes too, identity fraud, evading investigation. I convinced myself that coming forward would only cause more pain, reopen old wounds. Until now, Steinman observed. Until a plumber with integrity found a hidden door, Maria corrected with a faint smile. God works in mysterious ways, detective. She turned to her brother, really looking at him for the first time since her revelation. Tommy, I don't expect forgiveness. What I did to you, to our family? She got no further before Thomas embraced her, his large frame shaking with silent sobs. After a moment's hesitation, Maria returned the embrace, her own tears finally spilling over. Detective Steinman discreetly looked away, allowing the siblings their moment of reunion. Her mind, however, was already processing the legal implications of Maria's story. Technically, several crimes had been committed, identity fraud at minimum, but given the circumstances and the passage of time. When the siblings finally separated, both wiping tears, Steinman cleared her throat gently. Ms. Keller, there are still many details to sort through. The evidence you hid has been preserved remarkably well. It may still be possible to trace the stolen funds, perhaps even recover some of them. After all this time? Maria asked, surprised. Financial crimes leave long paper trails, Steinman explained. And while the statute of limitations has expired on much of this, civil recovery might still be possible. The current diocese leadership should at least be made aware of what happened. Thomas kept his hand on his sister's shoulder, as if afraid she might disappear again if he broke contact. What happens to Maria now? Legally, I mean. Steinman considered her answer carefully. That's complicated. Assuming a false identity is a crime, but given the extenuating circumstances and the time past, she made a decision. I believe the district attorney will be more interested in the historical embezzlement case than in pursuing charges against Ms. Keller. But you will need to make an official statement, and there will be questions to answer. Maria nodded solemnly. I've lived with secrets for 40 years, detective. I'm ready for the truth now. She turned to her brother. All of it, no matter the consequences. You won't face them alone, Thomas assured her, his voice firm. Not anymore. 3 days later, Marco Vasquez returned to St. Catherine's to finally repair the leaking pipe that had started everything. The police had cleared him to resume work, though the tunnel entrance remained sealed off with police tape. As he gathered his tools, he noticed an elderly woman entering the church, accompanied by Thomas Keller and Detective Steinman. Though he'd seen the news reports about the miraculous rediscovery of Sister Maria Therese Keller, it was different seeing her in person, the missing nun, alive after all these years. She noticed him watching and approached, her steps measured but steady. Mr. Vasquez, she said warmly, I understand I have you to thank for finding my hidden door. Marco shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Just doing my job, Mum. The pipe was leaking. Fixing what's broken is sacred work, she said, with a smile that transformed her lined face, revealing the young nun she had once been. Sometimes that means pipes, sometimes truths. They say you'll be telling your story at Sunday's service, Marco said, recalling the announcement in the local paper. Sister Maria, she had reclaimed the title, if not the habit, nodded. The bishop has asked me to speak about reconciliation and healing. Apparently, the church is full of new faces eager to hear from the miracle nun. She seemed both amused and dismayed by the attention. Will you go back to being a nun, officially, I mean? She considered the question thoughtfully. I've lived outside the convent walls longer than I lived within them now, but in my heart, I never stopped being who I was called to be. She glanced around the church, sunlight once again streaming through the stained glass windows. My vocation was to truth and service. The habit was just clothing. Thomas approached them. Maria, the bishop is ready to meet with you now. She nodded, then turned back to Marco. Will you come on Sunday, Mr. Vasquez? I'd like to publicly thank the man whose curiosity and conscience brought truth to light. Marco found himself agreeing, though he hadn't attended Mass regularly in years. As Sister Maria walked away with her brother, Detective Steinman lingered behind. Quite a chain of events you set in motion, she commented. Just a leaky pipe, Marco demurred again. Sometimes that's all it takes, the detective replied. One small crack for the truth to find its way out. She gestured toward where diocese officials were now gathering around Sister Maria. The current bishop has ordered a full investigation into the historical embezzlement. They're already talking about restitution funds for the charities that were shortchanged 4 decades ago. Marco nodded, feeling a satisfaction that went beyond the usual pride in a job well done. And Sister Maria? What happens to her now? Legally, she's in the clear. The DA has declined to pursue any charges related to her assumed identity. As for the rest, Steinman shrugged. That's between her and her family. And her God, I suppose. As if hearing her name, Sister Maria glanced back toward them, offering a small, serene smile before turning to address the bishop. Even from a distance, Marco could see the straight set of her shoulders, the quiet dignity in her bearing. He thought about the rosary found in that underground chamber, each bead carved by her brother's hands, preserved through decades of hiding and fear. How she had clung to it, to her faith, even when separated from everything else she had known and loved. "Some things never break," he murmured, almost to himself. "What's that?" Steinman asked. Marco shook his head, returning his attention to his tools and the job at hand. "Nothing important. Just thinking about what lasts when everything else falls apart." The detective studied him for a moment, then nodded as if he'd said something profound. "I'd better join them. Good luck with that pipe, Mr. Vasquez." "Thanks," Marco replied. "But I think the real repair work is just beginning." As Steinman walked away, Marco knelt beside the sanctuary floor, tools ready to fix the physical damage that had, by some divine coincidence or cosmic irony, led to the healing of wounds far deeper than any he had been called to repair. In the background he could hear Sister Maria's voice, strong and clear despite her years, begin to tell her story from the beginning. 6 months later, St. Catherine's Church was filled beyond capacity, folding chairs set up in the aisles to accommodate the overflow crowd. Marco Vasquez, dressed in his Sunday best, sat beside his wife in the third row, watching as Sister Maria Therese Keller stood at the lectern. She wore simple clothes, not a habit, but a blue dress with a modest silver cross at her throat. At 73, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had faced fear and found peace on the other side. "Today," she was saying, "we dedicate the Maria Therese Keller Fund for Transparency and Healing. Through the generosity of the diocese and private donors, over $3 million will support victims of institutional abuse, fund investigative journalism focused on corruption, and provide whistleblower protections for those who speak truth to power." The assembled crowd applauded, many wiping tears from their eyes. In the front row, Thomas Keller beamed with pride, surrounded by family members who had thought their sister lost forever. 40 years ago I made a choice born of fear," Sister Maria continued. "I believed isolation was safety, silence was survival. I was wrong." Her gaze swept across the congregation. "No truth remains buried forever. No secret can withstand the persistent drip of time and conscience that eventually breaks through every wall we build." Marco felt a nudge from his wife, who smiled knowingly at him. He had become something of a local celebrity after the story broke nationally. The plumber who found the missing nun, as one headline had put it. He'd declined most interview requests, uncomfortable with the attention, but had agreed to be here today at Sister Maria's personal request. "The pipes that God uses to deliver truth come in many forms," Sister Maria was saying now, her eyes finding Marco in the crowd. "Sometimes they're ordinary people doing ordinary jobs with extraordinary integrity. Sometimes they're brothers who never stop believing, detectives who listen to unlikely stories, priests who choose compassion over conformity." After the service, a reception was held in the church hall. The room buzzed with conversation as people lined up to speak with Sister Maria, who greeted each person with remarkable energy and focus. When Marco's turn came, she clasped his hand warmly. "How's business, Mr. Vasquez?" He laughed. Busier than ever. Turns out people trust a plumber who helps solve 40-year-old mysteries." "God works in mysterious ways," she replied with a twinkle in her eye. "And practical ones, too." "I've been meaning to ask you something," Marco said. "When you were hiding in that chamber all those months, weren't you afraid? Being underground, alone, not knowing if you'd ever be free again?" Sister Maria considered the question seriously. "Fear was my constant companion," she admitted. "But so was faith. Not just in God, but in truth itself, that what is hidden will eventually come to light." She smiled at him. That someone, someday, would notice what was wrong and care enough to investigate. "A leaky pipe and a hollow sound," Marco mused. "Such small things." "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, Mr. Vasquez," Sister Maria replied. "The smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it becomes a tree where birds can nest. Truth works the same way." As Marco moved on to allow others their moment with Sister Maria, he glanced back at the woman who had spent 40 years in hiding, only to emerge and immediately begin working to ensure that others would never face the same impossible choices. Some pipes carried water, some carried truth. Both were essential, and both required maintenance, vigilance, and occasionally someone willing to look beyond the surface when something didn't seem right. Marco Vasquez had simply been doing his job that day beneath St. Catherine's floor, but in finding one hidden door, he had helped open many others, doors of reconciliation, justice, and healing that would remain open long after the physical repairs to the church were forgotten. If you found this story touching, please remember to like and subscribe for more emotional stories of loss and discovery. This is based on events that happen more often than we realize, so share it with someone who needs to hear this.